It is a lot of fun, but a little bit hectic getting through 24 speakers in one day. But hopefully you guys are enjoying all of our quick sessions here. Our next speaker is Muazma Zahid, and she's going to talk to us about breaking through bias in tech and data. Muazma is a principal engineering manager at Microsoft Azure, where she enables customers to deploy the most demanding data workloads on Azure. She has been a data engineer, architect, and speaker for over 14 years, working on several big data, cloud computing, and AI technologies. Her machine learning research software is used in EKG machines all around the world. She's also an advocate of diversity, equity, and inclusion. All right, I'm going to go ahead and bring Muazma here up on our virtual stage. Hello, hello. Welcome to the Dedicated Expo.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Kate.
Hi, I'm not going to take up much of your time. I'm going to hop off, give you your 10 minutes on stage, and then we'll be back with some questions.
Sounds good. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for taking out time to listen to me today. I am talking about breaking through bias in tech. This is a LinkedIn Learning course that I have out there. If you want to know more, you can definitely go and check that out. This is going to be a 10-minute summary of that. And I'm going to talk through what is bias, how you can actually remove it, and how you can make more inclusive technology. So as I was introduced, I'm a principal engineering manager at Microsoft. I do a lot of other things as well. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, Twitter, and there's a link tree there for you to reach out to me if there are any questions that I'm not able to answer today. So let's talk about bias, right? We have heard this word so many times, what is bias, and we actually know that this exists. I'm not going to talk about the explicit bias here. I'm going to be talking about unconscious bias. So why it is important is that we are all biased. That's the number one thing. So we have to understand that everybody is biased at some level. There's so many different types of bias that I'm going to just go through very quickly here so you know that difference and how it can impact the decisions and eventually the technology and the data that we actually interact with. So it's really, really important for us to understand the bias at the lowest level, understand our own biases. So when we go to the workforce, when we go to the workplace, we don't bring those things into the products that we build. And that's the main purpose. If you can take away just one thing from this call or this talk, is to understand that we are biased and we should actually double check and take a pause before we make those decisions when we are building any technology. So did you know that humans actually make around 35,000 different decisions a day on average? And most of these are actually unconscious decisions. So humans are actually built in a way that we take shortcuts. We actually take a lot of shortcuts to actually do the things that we are supposed to do throughout the day. How, for example, what is your toothbrush? How do you brush your hair? Where do you go to get your clothes? All of those tiny decisions. Again, there are some small decisions and there are some huge decisions which you take in terms of building technology. Our brains actually take these shortcuts to actually make sense of the information that we receive. So right now, when you're listening to me, you're taking in a lot of information from me and all the other amazing speakers since morning, and you are actually trying to make sense of that. You actually have that bias in yourself as well. So that can affect the decisions that you take about this session and the next steps probably that you will take after this session as well. This could be based on the color of my skin. This could be based on how I look. This could be based on how I was introduced. Or if you know me already, you might have seen me talk about this topic or other topics in the past as well. So you already have a certain impression of me or a certain bias that you have already built in the first few seconds of when I started this session. Looking at a visual example, just to overemphasize on this word, bias, you can see that the word B and I are actually the same color as A and S. It's just because of the colors of the lines on top of it are different, and they make you feel that those two words or those four of those are actually different from each other. It's the same color of red, which is actually the background of the word unconscious bias at the bottom. Again, I wanted to emphasize this so that you can know that bias exists even when you don't think it exists. So it's a very visual example just for you to kind of level set that even when you have data in front of you, you could be biased because you're looking at it from a different perspective than somebody else who's also taking the same information and who's also gathering the same data as you are. So types of unconscious bias. Unfortunately, I don't have infinite amount of time to go into all of them today. There are more than 150 different types of bias that exist in terms of cognitive bias, which is like built into our brain. Some of the most important ones, which we actually bring into the workforce every single day, are emphasized on this screen. I always want to talk about the Hans effect and the halo effect, because if you know something good about somebody, you're going to believe them more. If you're going to have a good impression of that person, whatever I'm talking about right now, let's say you had a halo effect, you would be really considering this as a good talk. But if you had a Hans effect about something, that how I look or how I speak or how I was introduced, whatever else you know about it, you might be having a Hans effect, and I'm like, what is she talking about, right? So again, taking some examples here. One of the other things is affinity bias. This is something that we all kind of go towards. We are biased toward people who look like us. We actually tend to be friends with people who are like us, who have similar backgrounds. In the data community, we are all biased towards people who have data backgrounds, for example, or a similar background like us. So this is something that we all take in. And then this is kind of a bias that is actually reflected in the decisions we make. The people we hire, the people we promote, the people we trust on, and the people who actually go and build that technology that we are building for the tomorrow. Examples of algorithmic bias. Again, there are two simple examples on this page. The left one is a fun one, where you have data about a dog or a muffin. This, considering a machine learning algorithm, it doesn't know which one is a dog, which one is a muffin. It is going to be based on the data decisions or the data training that you do for the machine learning. On the right hand side, you see a difference basically in the three major gender classifiers, and you can see the largest gap exists between people with darker skin tone versus lighter skin tone. Again, we can debate for hours about why this is, but because of the data representation and how the data is generated, we live in a biased world. The data is also biased. So those data pieces, when they go into algorithms, they turn into algorithmic bias. And it's really, really important for us to actually dig deep into, when we are building these machine learning models, when we are training these models, the data collection methods, all of the different types of data biases that exist on top of the cognitive bias that already I talked about. It's important to understand throughout the process of the data building, data migration, data input, data training, and eventually the results also. So there are all of the stages that you have to really think about and make sure that they don't creep into the algorithms that you actually build. Notice the difference. Can someone in the chat maybe just tell me what is the difference between these two? This is a very simple survey that you're doing about something that you did in setting up your account. This is a simple way of actually introducing a bias to your potential customer to send a response to you. If you put it in the chat, we can get back to that in a second. The simple example over here is the first one is already suggesting that you like the service. The second one is giving the customer or the end user to actually choose between the options. Again, when you take the data from these customers, even the questions can actually introduce the bias. So this is one example, again, very quick example that you can actually reduce bias when you're building surveys, when you're building or taking any feedback. And this also applies to the machine learning feedback loop that we take back into our algorithms and actually build more inclusive technology in the long run. Examples of algorithmic bias. There are so many different examples. Again, I don't have infinite amount of time here today. Some of the most common ones which have been in the news is in the facial recognition software. I'm not going to go into details of that. There are different stages of that, and they exist in different reasons. They exist for different reasons. There is bias in word association, especially in the NLP space. If you are in that natural language processing, you actually understand what I'm talking about. There is association of certain words with certain attributes. And then, of course, there is a whole category of stereotypes. By the age of 9, as humans, we already have built up certain stereotypes about certain things based on all the biases that we carry from our childhood, from the next stages. And then we bring them, all of that, to our workforce, and we build the technology, which is eventually biased as well. The other things is the online recruitment. So this is very, very important that I want to emphasize on that the way you put the job descriptions out, the wordings that you have in the job description have a huge impact on the people who are actually applying for those roles. So it's really, really us as the technology leaders, as the technology software engineers, data scientists, it's our responsibility to double and triple check in the whole process of the people, the process, and the technology to make sure that we can reduce the bias for the long run in order to build more inclusive technology. So far, all the bad news I said, right? I talked about a lot of bias, again, different types of bias in terms of cognitive bias, different types of bias that are existing in the data bias, how you collect that data and then actually feed the systems that use the data to be biased in terms of the final technology that we build. What could we do to actually make a difference, right? This is the question you might be asking. So very basic, very, very, very basic. Starting from the very first thing, we all have to identify that we are biased and this bias exists. There is a test that you can go take today. It's the implicit test. There's a link at the end that I can share. And definitely go check that, check out some of the biases that you might have. That's the first step you have to recognize. Anybody who says that I'm not biased is not saying the truth, right? That's the first very fundamental thing that we have to start with. The second thing is think critically, challenge the assumptions and traditions. When you are presented with a data point, challenge the assumptions, challenge the research method, challenge how it was presented. There's another interesting data fact that 75% of the time, if I am stating a particular data point in any presentation or any work presentation, the audience is going to believe that because I am coming as an authority and I'm saying a certain number. That number is going to be believed by whoever is in the audience, and they are going to take that number and make decisions on that. Very few people actually come back and challenge those assumptions. So that's really, really important that you actually start by challenging and think critically about certain decisions that you make in the whole pipeline of data collection to data training to actually the feedback loop that goes into this whole data and ML lifecycle. The third thing is be mindful of your words and actions. This is something beyond the workforce. This is something that we do in every single conversation that we go into. The terminologies that we use, the things how we present ourselves, the things how we think of other people also when we are interviewing them or other things. This is another thing to consider. And how you can do that is the number 4 here, which is to hit pause and then take action. If you mechanically take a pause in the short circuit of the brain, that how brains are wired to do things and take shortcuts, you automatically take a pause and think about why you're having a strong reaction to something or why you are saying certain thing. This is a very simple framework, but the more you practice this at your work and outside of work as well, you'll see that you will start taking less biased decisions, which will make more inclusive technology in the long run. In terms of the data bias or the tech bias, these are the 4 suggestions that I have for you. Number 1 is the tech recruitment. So as I said, this whole thing is around the people, process, and the technology. It starts with the people. If you don't have inclusion in the process, if you don't have the hiring committee who is not biased, who is not inclusive of and has a decent representation, you're not going to hire a workforce which is representative of the world, right? So you start with the tech recruitment process in your companies, in your teams. Even if you're not in that process, ask those questions and understand how the people who are joining your teams are getting hired in your teams. And what is that you can do as your team member or your manager can do or your team can do to make the culture more inclusive. Second is the process. So taking the example of the survey, you can actually double check and triple check the survey questions, for example, when you're getting the data from people. This is one way that you can improve the process to make that survey more inclusive. The other examples could be make the features more accessible. There is a huge population of the world who are not, who have accessibility issues. So a lot of the time we consider a particular end user and we build those products for that end user. So the first thing, again, the second thing you can do is to think about beyond that typical beta users or alpha users of your app and think beyond the typical customer that you have in your mind and consider the broader audience as well. Last but not least, definitely use inclusive language and code. It is very important, the words like master list, slave list, things like that. This has been a debate in GitHub and a lot of places for a long time, but this is the time to actually start including more inclusive language in our code. Then the data bias. Again, it could be a talk in itself. There are so many different types of data biases. There are different methods that you can reduce it. A lot of companies have really great frameworks that you can use as an example. I can share a few at the end as well. And definitely that is something you can also do. Last but not least, when you are building machine learning AI software, think about responsible AI. That's the future. I know there are a few other talks during today also that are going to be focusing on this. So definitely check out the frameworks for fairness, accountability, reliability, safety, and transparency of the models that you're building. And I will leave with this statement. This is just something that I truly, truly believe in, that every conversation is an opportunity to actively listen, empower, motivate, and help others. So every conversation, every meeting, everywhere that you go, you have an opportunity to show up as an unbiased or less biased, because we cannot completely reduce or remove bias. We can try to reduce it in all of the conversations that we go to, be more inclusive, be there, and actually build more inclusive technology. With that, I have the resources here. You can take a screenshot of this. There's a LinkedIn Learning course. Then the test that I mentioned. There is an example of all the different types of job descriptions and how unconscious bias can happen there. There are a couple of tools that you can use free of cost to actually look at the bias in job descriptions, and also some of the links how you can connect with me. That's all that I had for today. Thank you so much for having me, and I think we have a few minutes to take some questions.
Yes, absolutely. Muazzama, thank you so much for that really insightful presentation. I think, again, this is something that we need to pay more attention to and continue having these conversations. We do have time for a couple of questions. I'm going to go ahead and get started with a question from Eric here. And he's talking about taking polls. Do you find that normalization is difficult? For example, somebody's rating of 8 out of 10 can be another person's 5 out of 10, and so on. So do you have any advice on how to handle this to get more accurate insights?
Yeah, I think one of the advice that I had from one of my product managers, again, this is not my field, is you actually divide your data into the cohorts, into the different types of cohorts or the customer side. So for example, if you have a data about a particular app or a feature that you're launching, and you have different age groups of the people who are responding to you, you can divide into that age groups and see what is that. And between those age groups, normalization would help. But if you try to do it across all of the data set and all of the different cohorts all together, I 100% agree that it would be really, really hard to actually do that and actually have some meaningful results from that survey. So I would definitely think about a cohort approach, and then there could be multiple levels of that. There could be different ways you can dissect the same data to look at that and make more informed decisions based on that.
Okay, great. Yeah, speaking of decisions, 35,000 decisions per day. That number was mind-blowing. I can't believe I make that many. I think I make 1 or 2 decisions a day, but I guess the rest are just kind of happening on their own. We'll take one more question here from George. He's asking, is there any positive aspects of having a bias?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think yes. So there are certain biases. For example, the way you have the way human brains work for something which is right versus wrong is based on the bias that you're built on, right? For example, something that is right for you is not something right that could be right for me, right? Mm-hmm. So if you have a certain bias based on that, be it a bias because of the conformity group that you are, the religion that you have, and other things altogether, that is true, right? So that is valid, and at no point there is that one bias better than the other. And then even for the same bias, there's not like if you're saying X, I'm saying Y, they're opposite. They could be both valid. So this is a very interesting actually research area. There are a few papers that I can share offline or maybe on LinkedIn later, which you can read on. And definitely there are advantages of bias where you have multiple opinions and different types of bias that can build even more inclusive technology when you think about from that perspective of multiple experiences and different experiences. And especially the example that I gave about a diverse customer group is where, let's say you're launching a shopping app and you're looking at people from London, and you do not think about people in Mexico or people in Southeast Asia or somewhere else. That bias is already there, and that bias could be useful in some situations where somebody who has a bias towards that audience might be useful to actually bring more inclusive data.
Yeah, thank you. I think it'll be really helpful if you shared some of that. So guys, if you're interested in the topic, definitely follow Muazzama on LinkedIn. She's going to share some more links and some more resources for you to look at. So Muazzama, thank you so much again for your time here.